The Galactic War Council's chamber was carved from black stone, older than most civilizations still alive. Its walls rose so high that the ceiling disappeared into shadows, and the air was heavy with the scent of metal and ozone. 12 high-backed chairs surrounded a long table made of a single slab of obsidian. Each chair was filled by the leader of a great alien power except for one. At the far end, facing the main entrance, was the only seat that had been empty. For more than a century, dust never seemed to touch it. No one dared to sit there. That was the human seat. The galaxy had believed the race who owned it was gone forever, wiped out in the last collapse, and everyone preferred it that way. Meeting was different. The Vorowin Empire was pushing into the central sectors, taking whole star systems in weeks. Entire fleets had been destroyed without survivors. The alien leaders argued loudly over maps projected in the air, voices full of panic and pride. But suddenly, the sound changed. The massive doors at the end of the chamber groaned as they began to open. The argument faded into silence. Even the holograms flickered, as if the air itself was holding its breath. A single figure stepped inside, tall, straight-backed, wearing a black uniform that seemed out of place in this age of polished armor and glowing fabrics. The boots were scuffed but clean. The sleeves carried faded patches symbols that the council didn't recognize, but the older members did. And it made their blood run cold. No guards had announced this person, no escorts had brought them in. They simply walked forward, each step echoing across the stone floor. The alien. Leaders glanced at each other but didn't speak. Something about the way the newcomer moved felt dangerous. Not rushed, not hesitant, just inevitable. The figure reached the empty chair, paused, and looked at it for a moment, as if remembering something that happened a long time ago. Then, they sat down. No one had touched that seat in over 100 years. But the human, because that's what they had to be settled into it like it had been waiting for them all along. Slowly, the human placed a small, battered metal case onto the table. It made a dull, heavy sound when it touched the obsidian. No one could guess what was inside, but the way the human's hand rested on it suggested it wasn't a weapon, and yet it could be something far worse. The silence broke when Chancellor Vorek of the Jadal Alliance leaned forward, his many eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" His voice was low, but the weight in it could have crushed stone. The human didn't answer right away. They looked around the table, meeting every pair of alien eyes sharp, cold, steady. When they spoke, the voice was calm, but it carried a strange edge that made the chamber seem smaller. "You've been fighting wrong." The council shifted. Uneasily, some leaders frowned. Others whispered in their own languages. One of the younger members laughed a nervous, high-pitched sound that echoed awkwardly. "You're a bold stranger to walk into this place," and the human cut them off without raising their voice. Bold? No. Necessary. Their fingers tapped once on the metal case, the sound sharp and final. "You've been playing by rules the Vorowin do not respect. You've been losing because of it." "Your name?" Chancellor Vorek pressed again, irritation now mixing with curiosity. The human leaned back in the chair, eyes still locked on the Chancellor. "Commander Elias Cade, Earth Defense Fleet, 3rd Strike Division." The words were spoken slowly, deliberately, like they were meant to be remembered. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some didn't know the name of the rank. Others didn't. The realization was worse than disbelief. That rank had not been used for over 150 years, not since the human fleets had been declared extinct. One of the older council members, scaled and ancient, spoke in a voice that almost trembled. "That's impossible. Humans are gone." Made certain, the human's eyes hardened. "You didn't make certain enough." The words hit like a blade against stone. The air felt heavier, and for the first time in many years, the leaders at the war table realized they might not be the most dangerous beings in the room. The human's hands stayed on the case, as if they were deciding whether or not to open it. No one dared to speak, because every one of them understood whatever was inside could change the war. Or end it. The chamber stayed silent, but the silence felt different now, no longer the tense stillness of suspicion, but the heavy weight of something ancient waking up. Every eye stayed fixed on the battered case resting under the human's hand. Chancellor Vorek's gaze narrowed further. If you are truly who you claim, prove it. Anyone can wear an old uniform. The human's expression didn't change. Without a word, they unlatched the case. The metal hinges squealed, a sound far too loud in the stillness. Inside, stacked neatly in foam padding, were a dozen round metal discs. They were dull, scratched, and unremarkable to most, but a few, council members inhaled sharply. They knew what those discs were: old Earth War records. The kind no one had seen since before the collapse. The human took one disc, set it onto the table, and pressed the center. A pale blue light flickered into the air, and a hologram bloomed. Above it, it showed a battlefield in deep space, hundreds of ships locked in combat. Alien vessels from a forgotten era were exploding one after another, breaking apart under relentless fire. In the middle of it all, moved human ships smaller, faster, weaving between massive enemy cruisers like hunting predators among slow-moving prey. The council leaned forward, mesmerized. The tactics on display were unlike anything used today. Human fleets split apart, regrouped, and attacked from impossible angles. They used debris as cover, enemy wreckage as weapons, and seemed to turn chaos into their greatest ally. The Vorowin ships in the footage once considered invincible were torn apart in minutes. This battle, the human said quietly, was fought at Sol's outer edge. The Vorowin called it the Night of the Broken Sky. They lost 3 fleets in 4 hours. An alien general from the Thruel Dominion scoffed. Impossible. No force could destroy that many ships so quickly. The human's gaze slid toward him, sharp enough to cut. Lost to the Vorowin because you fight like them. You move in straight lines. You hold your formations. You obey patterns they learned to predict centuries ago. Humans don't fight like that. We never did. And where have you been, Commander? Gah! If your kind could win wars so easily, why did you vanish? The hologram shifted without warning. It showed a burning planet to citizens boiling, cities turned to glass. The council recognized it instantly. Earth, the human, didn't need to explain. The image alone was enough to silence the question. We didn't vanish, the human said. Slowly, we hid, and we waited. Because the galaxy wasn't ready to fight the way we fight. Murmurs filled the chamber. Some voices carried awe, others suspicion. 1 or 2 council members whispered to each other in fear. The Thruel general spoke again, though more cautiously now. If this is true, then why come back now? The human leaned forward, resting both hands on the table. Because you've been losing for too long. And if the Vorowin win here, there won't be anywhere left for us to hide. Vorek studied the human for a long moment, his eyes unblinking. Finally, he spoke. Half of this council will want to exile you. The other half will want to use you. But all of us will need proof before we trust you. The human's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Then give me a fleet. The words were met with shocked silence. A single human asking for a fleet from the most powerful war council in the galaxy. It was insane. But the council could feel something shifting in the room. The Vorowin were no longer the only thing to fear. Word of the human's appearance at the war table did not stay in that chamber for long. Before the council meeting even ended, encrypted transmissions were already racing across the galaxy. Some were sent in secret to political allies. More dangerously, slipped through the shadows into enemy hands. By the time the human left the council building, the news had reached the ears of the one race who feared it most, the Vorun, in the obsidian throne hall of the Vorun Emperor. The message was played on a hovering datasphere. Distorted image of the human's face appeared, along with a name that had not been spoken in over a century, Commander Elias Cade. The Emperor's clawed hand tightened on the arm of his throne, metal groaning under the pressure. Around him, his war ministers shifted uneasily. They knew the stories. The last time humans had fought the Vorowin, whole fleets had vanished without explanation. One minister hissed, "It cannot be real. The humans are extinct, the collapse erased." Them, the Emperor's golden eyes, burned like molten metal. Then explain why this. Ghost wears the old black of their war fleet, and why he sits in their council's human seat. His voice was low but venomous, each word carrying the weight of death. It is true, we will not make the same mistake twice. An order was given immediately. Every Voruan fleet in nearby sectors was to avoid direct engagement. The Emperor knew better than to underestimate a single human commander. Instead, he sent a different command of bounty. Across the shadow networks of the galaxy, an offer was made: the capture or confirmed death of Commander Elias Cade would be rewarded with enough wealth to buy a moon. Back in the neutral capital, where the Galactic War Council met, Cade was already under quiet watch. Alien soldiers from 3 different races trailed him at a distance, trying to decide if they were his guards or his jailers. Cade didn't seem to notice, or maybe he simply didn't care. Walked with the same steady, deliberate steps that had carried him into the war chamber that night. As the twin moons rose over the capital's spire-filled skyline, a secure communicator on Cade's wrist blinked once, then again. The signal was faint, almost lost under layers of static, but the pattern in the beeps was unmistakable. A coded call sign, an old one that only human fleet officers would know. Cade stepped into the shadows of a narrow alley, activating. The signal, voice rough and hoarse, came through in broken bursts. "Elias, it's Rourke." The nomad's cry made it. "We're still out here." Coordinates, the transmission cut off with a sharp hiss of static. But not before the numbers came through. For the first time since he had entered the council chamber, Cade's face changed. Just slightly, but enough to show the smallest spark of something dangerous, hope. He didn't notice that high above the alley. In the dark underbelly of the city's towers, a small black drone was watching. Its single red lens followed his movements before vanishing into the night. Already racing to deliver his location to someone who was willing to kill for a moon's worth of wealth. 3 days later, the war table was filled again, though the atmosphere had shifted. Council members spoke in quieter tones, their eyes flicking often toward the far end, where Commander Elias Cade sat without invitation. In front of him was not the battered case this time, but a series of crude star maps spread across the glossy black table. The lines were hand-drawn in ink. A rarity in an age where everything was projected in light. These, Cade said, tapping the maps with a gloved finger, are the points where the Voruan fleets will strike next. Not where they might strike, where they will strike. They have patterns they don't know they have. Several council members exchanged doubtful looks. The Thruel general scoffed. "You claim to predict the movements of the largest military force in the galaxy? Our analysts, your analysts," Cade interrupted. "Think like you. You all think like the Voruan. You're fighting a mirror. I'm not." His plan was simple on the surface, but insane to the council. He wanted to break their fleets into small, fast groups, armed with lighter weapons, and send them into Voran-controlled sectors not to win battles, but to create chaos. The enemy would spread themselves thin, trying to crush what they thought were easy targets. Then, when they were scattered, the Council's main fleets would strike from unexpected angles. Alien captains murmured their objections. Smaller ships were weaker, slower to escape. It was suicide. Cade listened, then simply said, "You've been dying slowly for years. I'm offering you a way to win quickly." After hours of heated debate, the Council grudgingly agreed to let him test his strategy on one fleet, under strict observation. Several captains were volunteered. Though their expressions made it clear they didn't believe in this human's methods, the test came sooner than expected. A Voruan strike group slipped past the Council's border defenses, targeting a mining colony in the Kether Belt. The assigned alien fleet moved out under Cade's command. What happened next was something the Voruan hadn't seen in generations. Cade's ships didn't form defensive lines. They didn't fall back toward the colony. Instead, they dove into the enemy formation, weaving between the larger Voruan cruisers, hitting weak points with precise bursts before vanishing into asteroid cover. Several enemy vessels fired at each other by mistake, chasing shadows in the rock fields. In less than an hour, 20 Voruan ships were destroyed.
How one of Cade was lost.
The alien captains who had doubted him were silent on the return, tripped their eyes, betraying something they hadn't felt in years. Respect. But victory didn't go unnoticed. Among the wreckage, hidden on the drifting hull of a destroyed Voron cruiser, a tiny beacon pulsed. Far away, in the depths of the Voron Empire, the Emperor's war ministers watched the signal. One leaned close to whisper, "It's him." "There's no doubt now." The Emperor's voice was cold and certain. "Then we change the war. We no longer hunt his allies. We hunt him." The next council meeting was tense in a different way. The alien leaders no longer looked at Cade with open distrust. Now their eyes carried calculation, as if each one was trying to decide whether to call him an ally or a weapon they could control. Cade noticed it but didn't care. He was already thinking about the faint signal he had received from Rourke and the Nomad's cry. If other humans were still alive, scattered in the shadows of the galaxy, finding them would change everything. Midway through the meeting, an urgent transmission interrupted the session. A trembling officer from the Council's Outer Defense Network appeared as a hologram. "We've detected a Voron strike force in Sector 19 Gamma. They've bypassed our patrol routes. They're heading straight for an unregistered outpost." Cade's head snapped up. "Show me the location." The map appeared and his jaw tightened. He knew those coordinates. It was one of the hiding places humanity had kept. Secret for over a century, a small outpost built into the side of an asteroid, stocked with supplies and equipment for survivors. The council chamber erupted in voices, but Cade's cut through them like a blade. "We move now, with whatever ships we have ready." Council members hesitated. The Thrall general muttered, "It's not an official installation." "Why risk?" "Because if the Voron take it," Cade said, his voice low and dangerous, "they'll find evidence of what you all thought was gone. And then they'll come for more." He didn't wait for a vote. Within an hour, Cade was in the command seat of a small strike group, just 6 ships, barely enough to face the Voron force reported. They made the jump to 19 Gamma in silence. The battle was brutal from the start. Voron cruisers loomed over the asteroid base, bombarding it with heavy fire. Cade's ships emerged from hyperspace directly in their path, scattering into unpredictable attack patterns. They struck fast, weaving between enemy fire, using the asteroid's fractured surface for cover. Twice, Cade's ship passed so close to a Voron battleship that the enemy gunners couldn't adjust in time. In the chaos, a docking tunnel from the asteroid opened, and a battered transport launched, escorted by 2 small gunships. Cade recognized the markings human. His voice was sharp over comms. "Cover that transport! All ships! Defensive screen!" They fought their way clear, but the victory came at a cost. One of the Council's ships was destroyed, and the asteroid base itself was left in ruins. On board the rescued transport, Cade found survivors fewer than he hoped. Among them was a man with a lined face and eyes that still burned with defiance. It was Rourke. In the quiet aftermath, as the wounded retreated, Rourke pulled Cade aside. His voice was low. "Elias, it's worse than we thought. The Voron aren't just conquering, they're cleaning up, erasing traces. Someone's feeding them targets, someone high up." Cade stared at him, the words sinking in like cold steel. If Rourke was right, the war wasn't just about the Voron. Anymore, it was about a traitor sitting somewhere close to the heart of the galaxies. Leadership. The council chamber was quieter than usual when Cade returned, but the silence wasn't from respect. It was the sharp, heavy quiet of people guarding secrets. The survivors from the asteroid outpost were under medical care in a secured wing of the capital. But Cade had already taken Rourke's warning to heart. He didn't waste time. Entered, the alien leaders straightened in their seats, their expressions unreadable. "You didn't authorize that mission, Chancellor," Verek said coldly. "You acted outside council command." Cade didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, meeting their eyes one by one. "If I'd waited for you to decide, the Voron would have erased proof of humanity's survival, and several of you wouldn't be able to look me in the eye right now." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Some glared, others shifted uncomfortably. Cade's voice stayed calm, but his words hit like hammer strikes. I know someone here has been feeding the Voroan information. They knew exactly where to strike. That outpost's location was buried so deep that only a few people in this galaxy could have known it existed. Gasps and mutters filled the chamber, but no one admitted anything. Cade reached into his uniform and placed a small data drive on the table. Rourke pulled this from the Voroan flagship systems. It's encrypted, but the source is clear. The transmissions came from inside the council. One of the younger members slammed a clawed hand onto the table. Accusations will divide us at a time we cannot afford. Division isn't the danger, Cade cut in sharply. Rot from the inside is. Before the council could respond, alarms blared. Through the chamber, a security officer's voice came over the intercom. Voroan fleet incoming, direct approach toward the capital. Chaos erupted. Council guards rushed to their posts. Leaders barked orders into coms. Cade didn't hesitate. I'm taking the fleet. Vorak stared at him for a moment, torn between protocol and survival, then gave a single curt nod. Go. Minutes later, the united fleets of the council launched together for the first time in years. Cade stood on the bridge of the flagship, coordinating alien captains in a way no one had managed before. Quick, sharp orders, no wasted movement. His tactics turned the battle into a storm of motion, ships darting through enemy lines, striking hard and vanishing before the Voroon could adapt. When the dust settled, the Voroan fleet was in ruins. The capital stood untouched, but as Cade returned to the war table, the data drive still sat where he had left it. No one dared to touch it. Cade looked around the table, his voice low. But carrying through the chamber, this war isn't over. Neither is the hunt for the one who betrayed us. From the shadows near the chamber's edge, Rourke stepped forward, not alone. Behind him stood dozens of humans in old Earth uniforms, their presence like a thunderclap in the silent hall. For the first time in over a century, the human seat was no longer just a memory. And the galaxy knew it would never be empty again. The chamber doors stood wide open, and the sound of boots echoed across the black stone floor. Not just one pair this time, dozens. The council members turned, their eyes widening as the humans filed in behind Rourke, every one of them wearing the black and gray uniforms of the old Earth's defense fleet. Their faces were weathered, their movements sharp, and their eyes carried the cold, steady fire of people who had fought wars no one else had survived. Cade didn't sit this time, stood at the far end of the war table, hands resting on the obsidian surface, his voice calm but cutting through the heavy silence. The galaxy believed we were gone. You thought we were a story, a warning, a ghost. But we didn't vanish. We prepared. And now the rules of this war have changed. He slid the recovered data drive across the table. The traitor is in this room. We've broken the Voroan encryption. Every transmission, every secret pass to them is on this drive. When this meeting ends, the guilty will be in chains. Or in the ground. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some council members rose to protest, but Cade raised a hand, and the protests died in their throats. He didn't need to shout. The Voroan are not the only threat. Treachery has been bleeding this galaxy dry from within. That ends today. Without waiting for approval, Cade activated the council's central holode's play. Names and images appeared in the air maps of transmissions linked directly to one council leader. The room turned toward him, shock and rage flaring across alien faces. Guards moved before he could speak, dragging him from his seat as he shouted curses in his native tongue. Cade watched without emotion. When the traitor was gone, he turned back to the others. This is what happens when you trust survival to politics. The Voroan won't be stopped with debates. They'll be stopped with action. Breck, who had once doubted him most, leaned forward. And what action do you propose, human? Cade's gaze swept the room. We take the fight to them. Not just a strike, not a defensive push. We burn their stronghold to the ground and make the Voroan remember what it means to fear. The plan was madness by council standards, but no one argued, not after the victory in the capital, not with the humans standing in the room like a blade drawn from its sheath. Weeks later, the united fleet, larger than any in recorded history, descended on the Vorowan home sector. Cade's strategies turned the battle into chaos for the enemy. Asteroid fields became weapons. Enemy ships were lured into traps where their own firepower destroyed them. And at the heart of it all, the human fleet struck with precision and fury, tearing through the Voruan's last defenses. When the Voruan flagship finally fell, exploding in a bloom of white fire, the galaxy watched in stunned silence. The war was not over, but its balance had shifted forever. Back at the war table, the human seat was no longer just a relic. It was occupied permanently. Cade sat once more, but this time with humans on both sides of him, their presence a promise. To the galaxy, he looked at the council, at the survivors, and at the stars beyond the chamber windows. "We were gone once," he said quietly, "and you thought that was the end. Now you know better. Humanity doesn't vanish. We wait, and when we return, we don't leave unfinished work." The galaxy had feared the return of humans. Now, they understood that fear would never fade because the humans were here to stay.